Gina established this business at the beginning of the year on the Sunshine Coast. Gina specialises in workplace health and safety and workplace law for business. Gina previously worked for large and small law firms in Melbourne, but saw the light and came to the coast. Gina's firm provides
literally saw the sunshine.
after COVID blockouts.
Yeah, that's it.
Gina's law firm provides full legal service support in the areas of workplace health and safety, employment law, including assisting clients with critical incident management support in the event of a serious or fatal workplace incident, and during WorkSafe Queensland regulator inquiries, investigation and prosecution stages following an incident. Outside Gina's legal work, Gina can be found in nature hiking, kayaking, cycling, tenting, bowling or singing. I'm going to ask if we're going to have an encore later of the singing.
No.
Today Gina's here to update us on what businesses need to know about the new work, health and safety, sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment laws that commenced recently in Queensland for those of us who weren't aware. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks, Annette. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I just started singing lessons. I actually started last year. I started out because I started this new business that I wanted to communicate with my clients in a way more effectively. So it really started out as a business proposition, which turned into something that's just been phenomenal and sort of a fun experience. And now I'm learning to sing and focusing on other adventures in the singing world. So yeah, that's been pretty cool. All right, this morning we've got a little bit of a dry topic. Law is always a dry topic. Unfortunately, I get to deliver the dry news. Our lawyers don't think so. But what we want to cover this morning, as Annette said, some developments that have happened here in Queensland more recently. The relevance is that it's already started, so you should already be complying, but a lot of businesses don't know the specifics of what's required around these developments in sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment at work. So this is an area that I deal with on a regular basis with my clients in terms of discrimination law, and as we go through, I'll give you some practical examples of the sorts of things I've seen, and I'd love to hear a little bit from you as to what you've seen in this particular area as well. But what we want to quickly cover this morning, and I know we've got very limited time, excuse me, what do the new laws require of business? What is sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment? The risk management approach which we're called upon to exercise in complying with these laws. So what do we have to do by way of risk managing this particular area? The requirement that we have to prepare what's called a prevention plan, so a prevention plan that deals with sexual harassment. So it's an obligation on every business in Queensland to have to prepare that and have a written document recording that prevention plan. I'll give you some guidance on how you can go about starting that process if you haven't yet, and how you can implement that prevention plan. And I'll also give you some resources so you don't have to come and pay my fees in order to do everything you need to do. But if you do need assistance, then I'm here to help and more than happy to have a chat and assist you through that process as well. Because the critical aspect of this is that we make sure that we're compliant. I was talking to Annette before, about compliance and business having all of these things that you need to do. And it may be that the WorkSafe regulator in Queensland isn't going to be tapping on your door and saying, where's your prevention plan? But if you were to have an incident, an employee or worker makes a complaint of sexual harassment and you end up in some forum with a tribunal, then these are the sorts of questions you're probably going to be asked. Did you have in place the legislative requirements around prevention plans? Did you have a policy? Did you have training, etc.? And if the regulator were to become aware of it, then they may come in and ask you questions about your compliance. And if you have an incident relating to this, no doubt they'll be asking specifically about it. So the Work Health and Safety Act in Queensland provides that every business has a duty to provide a safe work environment for workers, for those workers who are engaged by the business and who participate in performance of work in the business. So we all have duties to make sure that our workers are there's health and safety in relation to the way they go about their work practices day by day. But that doesn't extend to in the construction space, the manual sort of aspects. I came up here before, and as a work health and safety lawyer, I'm looking at voids all the time, and I'm quite comfortable that there's a higher level control here with a glass format. And that's a sort of a control that's there to manage the particular risk that I might fall over and go down, the void and have a serious injury. So that's, some sort of physical risk that might arise. But of course, there are also psychological risks that arise in workplaces as well. People who may be subjected to bullying type activity, or people who experience sexual harassment or sex or gender-based harassment in the workplace. And we as employers and business owners have a responsibility and an obligation under the legislation to make sure that both the physical and the psychological health and safety of our workers is looked after. So what are the amendments? Well, they're in the Work Health and Safety Regulation 2011 in Queensland. And whilst I was talking before about this duty that exists on a business, which has always existed for some time around managing and making sure that our workers are safe, we've now got prescribed regulations that deal specifically with managing this particular risk in the workplace, that is sexual harassment. So they're far more prescriptive, including this prevention plan, which I'll go into, which requires you to take certain steps to make sure that you're managing particular risks in your workplace around this area. Recently there was a survey done, well not so recent, 2022 Australian Human Rights Commission did a survey, and they identified that 77% of Australians aged 15 years or older have experienced sexual harassment in their lives. So that's 77% of people in the general population. 1 in 3 had been sexually harassed at work in the 5 years preceding the survey. 1 in 3. So it's quite prevalent. You may not be experiencing it or seeing it in your workplaces, but just know that there are businesses out there that are having to deal with this on a regular basis. And it is quite prevalent, hence the reason that this regulatory response came about. So what are the 5 main things that I want to bring to your attention about the changes are the, the commencement dates. So the prevention plan that I'm going to talk about is required to be in place from 1 March 2025. And the steps that we're going to go through in terms of developing and implementing that prevention plan around identifying how to control the particular risks as a business commenced on 1 September 2024. So they're already in effect and we're already required to comply with them. So what we're talking about this morning, you might want to start having a think about what you're going to do in order to execute this in your own business to ensure that you're compliant. So the commencement dates, we're going to have a look at the definitions of sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment behaviour. There's also, the third thing that's relevant is the need to identify the particular risk, and you have to identify that specifically within your own business, what that risk is around sexual harassment. And then you have to take proactive measures in relation to the risks you've identified, and that is that you have to implement control measures to make sure, and we'll talk about what control measures are, but to make sure that people are not exposed to sexual harassment at the workplace. And then the 5th one is the requirement to have this prevention plan. All right, so what is sexual harassment? I put a definition up there for you. Lots of words on a page on the slides. Don't worry, you can have these. Adam, I'll give them to you so that they can be shared around and people can look at them later. I don't want to go through them too prescriptively, but sexual harassment basically is unwelcome sexual behaviour, which such as unsolicited acts of physical intimacy, demands for sexual favours, those sorts of behaviours that are unwelcome by an individual and are of a sexual nature. Which are in circumstances where a reasonable person who is subjected to that behaviour would have anticipated that the possibility that they would be offended, humiliated or intimidated by the conduct. So the intention doesn't matter. If I engage in conduct which is sexual in nature and it's directed at a worker in the workplace and I intend to do that, then yes, that's sexual harassment and it's unlawful. But if I don't intend it and it's just the way I go about life, it's the way I communicate with my friends, it's the way I communicate with my colleagues, and I engage in that sort of conduct, then it might not be intentional on my part to engage in a directed sexual harassment behaviour towards a specific work individual. But that in itself, even though it's unintentional, can constitute sexual harassment and be unlawful under this legislation as well. And then we've got the definition also around sex or gender-based harassment. So to give you an example of that, some people in the workplace identify differently to their biological gender, obviously, and in those circumstances, individuals require certain support in order to enable them to function in the workplace in a way that recognises their own individual attributes as well as, their day-to-day work. I had a matter involving a discrimination claim by a transgender woman who brought a claim against the company on the basis that the company's systems that they had in place didn't recognise her dead name being excluded. So they continued to keep the old name in the systems, and it showed up everywhere. Every time she went to an attendance record, it would show up as her old name, her dead name. And she brought a discrimination complaint on that basis against the workplace to enable her to be recognised and her gender to be recognised in that way. So there's also, as well as sort of direct male-female sex harassment, there's also this gender-based harassment which you need to have regard to as well. All right, anyone got any examples of sexual harassment or seen sex gender harassment in their workplaces or heard of people who have had that experience? What are some examples of things that might cross the line in your experience? Yeah, shout it out because I don't remember everyone's name. So Adam, but go ahead, yeah.
Personally, my wife was in real estate for a long time, and the boss's son's, back when she was a teenager, but the boss's son he was fine when he was sober, but once you come to an event, he would get all wrong, and he'd hit on her before, and he'd had other ones that get a bit touchy, and all this sort of stuff. So coming into work socials, that's how that happened. He got a fair bit that way. He was the boss's son. So.
How did it get managed, Adam? Do you know? Like what?
I don't know. I don't think my wife spoke up about it.
Yep.
Which probably could have been done. I think he was in trouble, but he ended up marrying one of the staff.
Oh, right. Okay.
Look, it didn't go that far. Just thought it was a good example of
Yeah.
talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Any others?
What about foul language?
Yes. What have you seen, or how's that sort of played out?
I've had women in the workplace using foul language.
Yeah.
Just in general.
In sexual nature, sort of sexual connotations, or
Sexual nature,
okay.
just
Yeah.
in common.
Yeah, I mean that creates a psychological risk. It also can create physical risk, but it can create a psychological risk. May not be sexual harassment in the sense that it's not of a sexual nature or the conduct, in way it's foul language, but depends what words used. But certainly that behaviour would need to be managed. I would expect, whether it be through this means or through, a expectation of behaviours. And we're going to talk a little bit about, having policies in place, which I'm sure a lot of you already have if you've got larger workforces, is that, they have policies in place for expected behaviours in the workplace, and sexual harassment should come into that in terms of making sure that people don't engage in that conduct. One that's probably, Adam's touched on it a little bit, but one that's a little less, probably a little bit more fine line is, say you've got quite a close relationship with someone at work, so someone that you hang out with on a regular basis, and you're really good friends, you go out on the weekends, and I don't know, George comes back from holidays, and you go up to him and you go, "Hey George, come and give me a big hug. How was your holiday? Let's catch up this weekend. Let's just go and see a movie, and let's spend the night going out dancing, doing all those fun things that we always do." Now, that sort of context has to be assessed because in those circumstances there's a familiarity outside of work, and whilst it's in the workplace, they've got a relationship that exists outside of that. So that could be consensual between the two of them, and wouldn't be unlawful under this legislation. But what's careful to watch out for in those circumstances is, as a third party, who sees that as a customer, I might not be aware of that relationship, or the way in which they engage in that conduct might intimidate me as a third party, or concern me. So you've got to be a little bit careful about those sort of consensual relationships as well, and the impact that it might have on your business more widely. I had that experience more recently at a hairdresser's where I was sitting in the chair, and I was getting my hair done, and the hairdresser behind me was standing there, and another client came behind her and slapped her on the backside as she walked past, and came back the other way and slapped her on the backside again. And she said, Well, it looks like you've been working out really well. And I could sense that there was a level of uncomfort, you know, from her, and it kind of made me feel uncomfortable for her as well. So, you know, that's where it starts to get a little bit murky and cross the line and, you know, what's expected. And, you know, it's those sorts of circumstances that as a business you can talk to your employees about and just talk about some of these examples and, you know, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how you're going to go. And people having the opportunity to raise them if they've got concerns. Because as Adam said, you know, we might lose some great staff because of, you know, this happening covertly and not being aware of it. And someone could just, you know, leave, and if you don't have an exit interview or you don't get the opportunity for them to express that, we never know why they've left. So it can have ramifications. Anyway, I need... all right, so I've given you some examples. We've just discussed some. There's some more up there that you can take away and have a look at as well. So sexual harassment can be one-off. It can be a one-off incident, or it can be regular conduct, regular behaviour engaged in. It can be overt, so it can be very direct and asking someone out, asking a sexual favour. And I don't know how many times I get this around the Christmas period, around social functions or around conferences. Always the business will ring up and say, I never expected this was going to happen. But our executive, one of our executives has gone over the line and thought, you know, one of the junior staff really liked him and he thought that they were, you know, fine about it, but, you know, things got out of hand and yeah, it just got blown completely out of proportion. Add alcohol, add other things into the mix, and you know it creates a situation where people are a bit more open to demonstrating, you know, normal behaviour, their outside normal behaviours, and so you know these sort of things arise. So I always say to clients, it's a really great idea to refer back to your policies around this particular time when you're sending people out onto conferences or when they're going out even to third-party client events or you're having a function, is just to remind people of the expected behaviour in accordance with your policies so that people are aware of it and they know that if an incident occurs, they've got someone that they can go to during the course of that event to raise that particular issue. And we talked about being aware, not just that it might be not just the two people involved, the perpetrator and the victim, but there might also be others who get exposed to the behaviour in a vicarious liability point of view. So a third party might be a customer, might be, you know, experiencing the result of that conduct and have an impact on them. So less likely, but certainly something to consider and be aware of. I've put up there another slide. I'm not going to go through that either. You all know what the impacts of sexual harassment are in a workplace, but there's some examples there of the impacts. We spoke about resignation and other things, but you know, there's physical attributes, which I'm sure our dietitian over here has, you know, heard people having experiences like this around, you know, career and job where there are stressful situations that it can have both physical impacts as well as psychological impacts. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, the legislation now tells us that we have to have a risk management approach. And so what that basically means is that we need to have a look at our business and identify where sexual harassment as a hazard, what we call a work health and safety hazard, might arise. So where might it arise in the context of the work that you carry out? And in doing that, we have to have a look at who are our workers, and our workers, the relevant considerations of workers are that there are some workers who are more vulnerable to others in this particular area. So typically we're told that women tend to be more likely to be subjected to sexual harassment than men. That's not to say that men are not victims of sexual harassment, but that it's more likely. Persons who identify in that gender diverse area are also more likely to experience sexual harassment or gender sex discrimination. Casual employees, because there's insecurity of employment often, there might be a power imbalance or hierarchical sort of structure that exposes people in more vulnerable type employment arrangements to be subjected to this type of conduct, migrant workers, people who are on visas. So all of these are sorts of things to think about in terms of your business and those who might be more exposed than others. Then we also have a look at the workplace environment. So if I, for example, have a warehouse and my workers at the end of shift have to take the garbage out to the back of the warehouse and put it in a container and there's no lighting out the back, or if they have to, at the end of a late shift at 2 a.m. in the morning, have to go to a car park where there's no lighting, then they might be exposed to this risk more so than if it was lit up or we had a buddy system where people go together and leave. So that can expose people to risk. So these are all the things that we need to start to think about. And I'll show you a slide which you can take later and have a look at, but it'll set out for you what are the considerations that you should really be looking at in terms of workplace, the type of environment that people work in, and the types of workers that you have, so that you can look at that specific as to your own business, because each of you are going to have different risk profiles depending on the type of business that you run, depending on the type of workers, depending on the client base that you have. You know, hospitality, for example, individuals are having to work in environments where there's a lot of alcohol sometimes, and so they're obviously more exposed on those occasions to likelihood of sexual harassment than, say, another worker. So, you know, there are things that can be done around distress alarms in certain types of environments, shields that can come down and block, and other things. So, you know, there's a whole range of things. It's not prescriptive in terms of exactly what you need to do, but you do need to be looking at this from your own business perspective about how do we go about work and how do workers carry out work which might expose them to risk in this particular area. And that's, there's a couple of examples up there. All right, once we've identified those risks, we then need to implement some controls to manage the particular risk. And I've put up there for you some examples of how you might go around implementing some controls. The lighting is a great one, so, you know, putting in place some lighting to make sure that people, there's visible area when they go out to do tasks. And there's a whole range of others there as well, distress alarms. There's also a necessity, once you implement those controls to manage the particular risks, to also review them on a regular basis. So you want to review them to make sure that they're effective. So talking to your workers about, you know, we've implemented this system, is that working? What do you think about it? And getting their feedback and input on it, and getting their insights. And then doing a regular review of that to make sure, annually, making sure that, you know, what you've put in place by way of these control measures works. Might be that your work environment changes during the course of 12 months or so, so you might need to revisit this and look at what sort of controls you've got in place and how you're managing it. And the other aspect of all of this while you're going through this is consultation with your workers. So you have to engage with your workers in this process. So when you're looking at identifying the particular risks, talking to workers about what those risks are and how they arise, talking about what are the workplace characteristics and environment, do they see any others where this might arise in the context of carrying out work. So, you know, you can set up a schedule of short meetings to have discussions with employees. Some employers I'm advising on this process is to have one-on-one meetings, because some individuals may not want to talk about it in a staff group meeting environment, or to have, you know, a locked sort of box where people can provide anonymous feedback such that you can consider it and then look at implementing some controls. And the legislation is quite prescriptive around when you have to consult with workers about this, but any changes to the measures, when you're introducing them, when you're making decisions about them, are all times when you should be consulting with your workers. All right, so the prevention plan, which incorporates all of this, is a new requirement from 1 March, and it requires you to put together in writing a plan that pulls all this together. So basically what it does is it creates an identification of what are the risks in your business, what are the controls that you intend to implement to manage the particular risks. When we went back through before around that process, you know, looking at the worker, the characteristics of the workplace, the environment, etc., you have to record all of that in the plan as to how you went about that process. You need to record all of the consultation that you've done with workers, so the meetings that you've had and how you went about consultation, that needs to be in the plan. And you need to have in there the procedure that you have for managing the reporting of a sexual harassment complaint. So if you don't already have a complaint procedure in place, you need to get one, and that needs to go into this particular plan as to how you're going to manage any complaint that might come through. And the reporting has to deal with, how the report's going to be investigated, how the person who made the reports and other parties will be informed of the result of the investigation. So there are a whole range of steps that have to be followed in terms of implementing that type of reporting mechanism as well. And then once you've done the plan and you've got it all together, and you've had consultation with your employees about these things and you've documented it, then you need to share that with your workers, and you need to make it accessible to workers. So for example, if I'm in a workplace and I've been there for 12 months and a prevention plan is developed in that time, then that gets shared with me. But if I'm a new worker that comes in afterwards, you need to make sure that that knows that there's this plan in place and what the processes are around raising a complaint, etc. So, as part of your induction process, making sure it's in there. You might incorporate it into your handbook, your employment handbook, have the prevention plan as an annexure to that, or as part of your sexual harassment policy within the handbook as well. And then once you've implemented it and advised employees how to access it, then you need to review the plan. And there are some prescribed circumstances where you absolutely have to review it. If there is ever a report of sexual harassment by a worker in the workplace, then you need to do it. If you have a HSR or a committee, so a health and safety representative or a health and safety committee, some of the construction people will know what I'm talking about, then they might request a review, and you have to, in those circumstances, review the prevention plan once you've done that. Otherwise, every 3 years, you have to review the prevention plan. There are some penalties there around failure to comply with the prevention plan, but that's not just a one-off. So you could be found in breach a lot of different areas in terms of the prevention plan, not prescribing the control measures in there, not putting in the procedure for dealing with it, not reviewing the plan. There could be a number of breaches. So it's not just a flat $9,000 done deal. It's like you could be in breach for several failures and could be subjected to a maximum penalty for each of those breaches. So it could be more than that. Okay, guidance on preparing the prevention plan. So what I would suggest is that you get started as soon as possible given the date. So I'm conscious that you've all got lots of things on your plate, etc., but just be aware that this is another one that you're just going to have to get done and to ensure compliance. Develop the plan and have it prepared, implemented. Decide on your team, who's going to do this work, who's going to execute it, who's going to be responsible for making sure that it gets done, and then make sure that it's a consultation framework's been done, set up with your workers, and then once you've got that plan in place, then making sure that workers know where to access it and how to go about raising a complaint. Make sure that the contents of the prevention plan are met. So I've put up on the slide those, but if you want to be very specific about it, go to the guidance material, which I'll come to in a moment, or go to the specific regulation that deals with this. It's in section 55 of the Work Health and Safety Regulation 2011 in Queensland. And if you go to the section that deals with prevention plans, it sets out each of these steps that we've been talking about this morning as to what the prevention plan needs to cover. Make sure that your reporting is rigor tested. I'm going to take you to a resource which provides a template plan, and the template plan will take you through what you need to include in your resolution procedure, what it should cover. So make sure that that gets covered off. And then make sure that once you've done all of that, that you don't delay, that you get it out to workers and you communicate it and advise them as to how they can access it in the future, and make sure, as I say, that it goes into your induction program as well. And determine what's going to be your plan for reviewing the plan. So the prevention plan, there's those prescribed ones that I mentioned, those three, but also, regular reviewing of plans and regular reviewing of sexual harassment and how you're managing it is just part of your ongoing obligation as a duty holder under the legislation. there's some resources for you. So there's a great code of practice that looks at psychosocial hazards in the workplace and how to go about managing risk. That's a bit more general, so it's not specific as to sexual harassment, but it does cover sexual harassment as a psychological risk, and it's worth having a look at that. Helpfully, the Queensland Government has put out some supporting documentation, which includes a guidance and fact sheet. If you go to the workplace.queensland.gov.au website and then look up sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment, you'll see the guides that are there, which you can print off. And one of those is sort of a factual guide that you can provide to your staff to explain why you're going about this and why you're required to do it. And then also there's helpfully a prevention plan template, which can help guide the process as well. But of course, you're going to have to fill it out in terms of the specifics of your own workplace to make sure that it's compliant. How's that all sound? Yeah. So anyone started this process yet, or was aware of it, or aware of it, heard of it? Did you know now you've got a better idea of what's involved in it and where you might go for information in order to pull it together? If you get stuck with any of that, just contact me. I'll give you my contact details are on the back, my email, phone number, etc. I'm more than happy to have a chat, and we can go through, what you've got any questions about. The other area to watch space at the moment is the anti-discrimination law changes. When I say this space, I mean the sexual harassment space, which is outside of the work health and safety, but it's relevant, dealing with sexual harassment. And that is a bill which was introduced. It was due to actually commence from 1 July this year, but it's been delayed. So the government has delayed it and is subject to further consultation. But one of the interesting things that comes out of the bill is that it expands the list of what are protected attributes under that legislation. So gender is a protected attribute under anti-discrimination legislation. But outside of that, there's also this now irrelevant medical records. So when you engage employees in the workplace and you have a specific job description as to what you need them to do, you need a certain skill set, but you also need them to have physical capability to be able to perform that role. So you might need to ask them for supporting information around whether or not they can perform the role. And that might include in your induction process listing out the need for some medical information. It's now going to be, you can't, once this bill becomes legislation, if it does in its current format, once the expanded attributes extends out to irrelevant medical record, you won't be able to ask a worker just to provide their medical records. You'll have to be very specific about what it is that you require and why you require it. As I understand it, that's been a sort of a focus of some particular industries in terms of mining, maritime and manufacturing, where employers have just asked for medical records and they've been able to make assessments on the basis of whether or not they should employ someone based on their entire medical record as opposed to specific to the workplace and the job description. Anyway, I just bring that up as a side. It's sort of a development in my area that I'm keeping a watch on as well. But yeah, keep a watch out for the anti-discrimination law changes because it does include some changes around sexual harassment as well. And it'll be a little while off now with further consultation, so maybe second half of the year. But yeah, keep an eye out for that as well. All right, that was all I had to say this morning, rush through. Give you a bit of an overview, but any questions or, yeah?
Who polices the compliance?
So the workplace or the WorkSafe Queensland regulator.
And do they just randomly?
Look, they do, sometimes they'll pick a topic and they'll go, let's go out and deal with sexual harassment prevention plans or sexual harassment in the workplace, and they'll pick a particular industry. They might pick health, and they'll go out and they'll target a particular area on the Sunshine Coast, and they'll go to all employees in that area and say, we're exercising our powers under the Act. We require you to produce your prevention plan. Yeah. Yes?
Gina, we all need more admin in our businesses.
Yes, I know.
Try not to tell the boys to wear their big boys pants.
Yeah. That's a good summary.
Just to spin off of that, we had a insurance broker here last year.
Yes.
He gave us 10 minutes on director's insurance.
Mm.
Does director's insurance cover you in the event of an investigation by a work cover or this sexual harassment?
Yeah, I don't think there's a specific exclusion, so it would depend on the actual policy as to whether it covered it or not. But there have been some developments in a lot of, I'd probably just need to check for Queensland, but I think that as a director or as an officer of an organisation, you can't get a policy that covers the penalty that might be imposed under the legislation. So you can't get an insurance policy. Yeah. But I'll double check that for you. I'll come back to you. Yeah, I think it's okay for the business, but not for individuals, because that way, otherwise individuals who are responsible for the organisation under the corporate veil escape their responsibilities. So that was specifically put into a number of pieces of legislation.
5 or 6 years in the court system.
Yeah.
And that whole, not so much the fine, but the end, which is breaking that 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
of legal representation, virtually breaking even innocent.
Yeah.
Sorry, one question, not on sexual harassment, but your HR in general?
Yes, I do work health and safety and workplace relations. So anything employment related, industrial relations related, yeah.
So I understand sometimes there's different rules for small business, medium business and large business,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yes.
Question is, what determines a small business?
Yeah. Under this legislation, there's no distinction under these changes. Yeah. It depends on which piece of legislation you're looking at, but like sometimes for unfair dismissal under the Fair Work Act, it's 1 to 15 employees. So it depends on what you're looking at. I think it's, so if you've got like say, 3 part-timers, then you equate it to 1, so it's 15 to the full-time equivalent. So it's 15 full-time equivalent.
Okay, so if you've got all casual workers, that fluctuates between 10 and 20
Yeah, I'll have a look at that as well. I'll come back to you on that,
okay,
give you the specifics, because it does vary depending on which piece of legislation you're looking at. Yeah.
Does this only apply to employees? What about contractors?
Sorry, that's a really good point. Applies to workers, and workers under the work health and safety legislation extends beyond employees to contractors, labour hire workers, work experience students, so anyone who comes in and performs work. Even there was a case up here in Queensland a while ago in my space in the work health and safety where a guy just came and helped his business mate on the weekend remove something off the back of a truck, and it crushed him. I think he was fatally injured in that incident, and the business was prosecuted. He wasn't directly employed, he wasn't necessarily working, he was exposed to risk by virtue of the business. Outside of the workplace or the worker definition, but as a third party who was exposed to risk of that business coming in and helping out. So kind of watch getting your mates to come around and help on the weekend in your business. Any others? Okay, well thanks so much for your participation and listening this morning, and if I can help with anything in this area specifically or more generally in work health and safety and workplace relations, employment law, please feel free to contact me. More than happy to have a chat. Thanks.
Thank you, Gina.
Oh, they're beautiful. Thank
you.
you.
Very much. This is from one of our members, Ellie, who couldn't be here today, from Cod and Flower Studio. So a plug for her. If you ever make a mistake, this is the place to go.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, Sally. Gorgeous. Thank you.
I think it's a really live topic at the moment. I don't know if the international news you have paid much attention to it, but there's as a South African male, this put a cold shiver down my spine. There is a sexual harassment case at the Antarctic base, South African Antarctic base at the moment. So you can imagine a small environment where they are stuck for such a long time in close confinement. The issues that guy is going to face, not just from the colleagues, but from the rest of the world when he actually gets home eventually. So thank you very much. Actually, as part of this, it does make you think. There is some sympathy from the people who actually have to draw up the rules around this, the legislation. because it is so nuanced, particularly for people of a certain vintage. This is it's such a sensitive issue that we just never saw this coming. And there's a saying that I've heard that's the rules are for the guidance of wise men and the observance of fools. So it's very difficult to get that absolutely right. And in sailing we have a similar saying, does nobody remember that John O'Day, who died defending his right of way? He was right, so right as he sailed along, but just as dead as if he was wrong. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you.
Just want to end. I know this is what you